This is how I make my sourdough bread in my kitchen at home. It's a tried and tested recipe, but as ever, you may need to tweak it ever so slightly. First, I start 10 hours before I plan to make my dough. For me, that's always on a Friday night, just before going to bed. I combine 15 grams of starter, which would have been fed in the morning, and add 50 ml of lukewarm water. I then add 50 grams of flour. I use 25 grams of wholemeal and 25 grams of plain white flour. It's not even strong bread flour for this. I then mix everything together to form a paste and then leave it to do its thing overnight for 10 hours at room temperature. The next day the leaven should look happy and all bubbly. I weigh 50 grams of strong wholemeal bread flour and 450 grams of strong white bread flour and dip it into a container large enough for the dough to prove in. Then I weigh 300 grams of warm water. I usually use a thermometer, but unfortunately it's broken, so I have to make sure it's cooler than my hand. Otherwise look for something 25 degrees Celsius, no hotter. Then add 100 grams of leaven to the water. When it floats, you can see that it's nice and active because of the bubbles. Mix it together and then add this to the flour, mixing using the spoon at first. Use your hands when it starts to get tough, making sure you incorporate all the flour from the edges. Once a stiff dough has formed, cover with the lid or tea towel and leave at room temperature for 30 to 45 minutes. Add 50 ml of lukewarm water to a bowl and 8 grams of table salt. Mix till dissolved and then pour over the dough, massaging the water using your hands. Don't worry if the dough breaks up and becomes stringy. Keep going until all the water is incorporated. Then try to lay the dough flat around the bottom of the container. Cover and leave for anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes depending on the temperature of the room. After the first rest, we can form the first coil fold. I find this easiest to do with wet hands. The first coil fold is the hardest as the dough has no gluten form, so it does not hold itself together. Take the top half of the dough and fold it underneath itself. Then take the second half of the dough and fold it underneath itself. This looks like a book fold. Turn the container by 90 degrees and repeat the top fold and the bottom fold. This is one coil fold and is what will help the gluten strands form, which will give your bread strength. Cover and rest your dough for 30 to 60 minutes. If you want to add any flavours or extras to your dough, add them before the second coil fold. I'm using about 60 grams of mixed seeds, but if it is your first go at sourdough, it may be easiest if you don't add anything. Other options could be herbs or even dried fruit. Again, using wet hands, take the top half and fold it underneath itself. Repeat on the bottom half. Turn by 90 degrees and then repeat again. Rest for 30 to 60 minutes. Do 2 more coil folds in exactly the same manner. You should perform 4 in total. Next, we pre-shape the dough. Turn the dough out onto the work surface and dust the surface lightly with a 50-50 mixture of plain white flour and rice flour. If making 2 loaves, cut the dough in half and flip the flour side down. Shape the dough using your hands, turning all the corners into the centre of the dough so the flour is on the outside. take care not to incorporate too much flour at this point. Flip the ball over so the seams are on the bottom, and use your hands and the bench scraper to build tension by pulling the dough round and tucking it under. Once it has built up enough tension in the surface, leave it to rest out on the bench, covered with a tea towel for 30 minutes. To form the final loaf shape, use a bench scraper to lift the dough up and over onto the work surface. The bottom should now be on the top. Take care not to deflate the dough while building tension in the surface of the dough. Stretch the bottom half of the dough out and fold it almost in half, leaving a little rim at the top. Stretch the sides of the dough out and fold the right side into the middle, followed by the left side. Finally, take the top tab of dough, stretch it out and fold it over the seams, and roll the dough away from you, tucking the seams into a fold so the seams are now on the bottom. If shaping a round piece of dough, tuck the ends into a ball shape by using your hands and a bench scraper. Leave the ball to rest on the work surface for a minute. Using the 50-50 mix of rice flour and plain white flour, dust your proving baskets with flour liberally to ensure the dough does not stick. There is nothing worse than spending hours making your dough only for it to get stuck in your basket and to deflate just before baking. If you don't have a proving basket, use a shallow bowl lined with a clean tea towel and dust with the flour. Using a bench scraper, lift the dough ball off the surface and turn it seam side up into the basket. What is the top of the loaf is now on the bottom of the basket. Pinch the seams to maintain tension across the dough. Cover and leave in the fridge overnight to slowly rise. The next day, put your Dutch oven into your oven and set it to maximum temperature. And once up to temperature, leave it for 20 minutes to make sure the pan is also up to temperature. Remove your dough from the fridge and cut a piece of baking parchment slightly larger than your dough. Have your razor blade at the ready. If you prefer, you can use a chopstick or skewer as a handle for the blade, but I prefer to just hold it. Take a few ice cubes from the freezer in preparation for baking the bread. Remove the cover on your dough, place the baking parchment over the proving basket and gently invert the dough onto the paper. Gently lift the basket off the dough. If the dough sticks, use more flour in the proving basket next time. Dust off any excess flour using your hands. Now we score the bread. Using a shallow angle, cut a deep score into the bread while supporting it with your other hand. Scoring the bread will allow the bread to fully expand in the oven, known as oven spring. You can also add any design you want using shallow cuts on the surface of the dough. Take the extremely hot pan out of the oven, leaving the pan lid in the oven to maintain temperature, and carefully transfer the parchment and dough into the pan, taking care not to burn yourself. Add a few cubes of ice underneath the parchment. Working as quickly as possible, return the pan to the oven and put the lid on to trap the steam. Trapping the steam is important as it helps keep the crust soft and allow for the loaf to grow to its maximum potential. Put a timer on for 20 minutes and reduce the temperature of the oven to 230 degrees Celsius. After 20 minutes, remove the lid and continue baking for a further 20 minutes till the crust is dark and crisp. Once baked, remove from the pan and leave to cool on a wire rack. Then listen to the song of the sourdough. If you are baking a second loaf, wipe the pan out, return it to the oven set at max for 10 minutes, and then repeat the process.